Pilots, how often do you have oh crap moments while everyone else on board is oblivious? And if you're at an airport waiting for your flight, my advance apologies for any heebie jeebies you might get while listening to this. We're going to be all right. Let's roll. I'm a pilot with about 300 hours. I own a 1967 Cessna 172 single engine, 4 seats, and I absolutely love my airplane. First flight after my check ride, I was flying my mom to visit my dad in another state. Up to this point, everything is going great. Smooth flight, no winds, not a cloud in the sky. My mom is sleeping in the back seat. We're descending into our destination when the plane starts shaking like crazy. Scanning my instruments, I notice an immediate RPM drop. The airplane is shaking so much I fear the engine will come loose from its mount. Luckily, there's an airport less than 5 miles away. I land, shut the engine down, and sit quietly and calm my nerves. It is at this point I hear my mom remark, "Oh, we're here." Turns out she had slept through the whole thing and woke up as soon as I shut the engine down. I explained what had happened and she was rather grateful she had slept through it. For the curious, my engine, a Continental 0300, was nearing TBO and had a piston that had begun to disintegrate. $20,000 and an engine overhaul later, we were back in the air. Well, I wish I could just afford a 20 grand repair out of nowhere. Story 2. Private pilot here. I fly itty-bitty little Cessna 172s. I've had a few. Shortly after getting licensed, I flew my wife's parents to Catalina. With 4 adults and enough fuel to get there and back, no gas on the island, we were a bit heavy, but well within the plane's limits. I had done all of my weight and balance calculations the night before and even consulted my instructor since I'd only been licensed a few months prior. The flight out to the island was uneventful. We had a nice lunch, walked around a bit, and were heading back in the early afternoon. Before takeoff, I got the WX report and noticed it was a bit warmer than earlier in the day. Planes don't take off as well in warm weather. I did the calculations again and we were still within limits for our weight, temp, and runway length. My instructor had taken me through warm takeoff, so I was prepared to have a longer than normal takeoff roll. We line up at the end of the runway. I hold brakes and bring the engine up, then roll out. We're gaining speed, but I can feel the plane isn't getting lighter. We hit our normal rotation speed, around 75 kts, and I rotate gently. The nose lifts up, the back wheel picks off a bit, and then the plane settles right back down to the runway. At this point, my sphincter puckers up and I seriously consider abandoning the takeoff. Catalina's runway ends at a cliff. If you overrun, you'd plummet down into the ocean. I check the airspeed, which is climbing steadily, so I know we'll be all right. Sure enough, we hit about 85 knots. I rotate again, and this time we're off for good. We had a lovely flight home and landed without incident. After we landed, my family all remarked that the whole trip was so smooth and pleasant. I waited a bit before telling my dad that I just about locked the brakes up and stopped the engine on takeoff to avoid running us off the cliff. The second one wasn't as bad. Took a buddy up a few weeks after getting licensed. We did some sightseeing and then came back to our home airport where the crosswinds had picked up considerably. You train for crosswinds a lot, but if you're not lucky, you don't get to experience them as much as you'd like with your instructor. I knew they were within my personal limits, but they were still stronger than any I had landed in previously. I crabbed the thing and damn near sideways. In an X-wind, you point the nose into the wind and compensate with aileron, then throw the thing straight just before touchdown. Making adjustments the whole way in, it was a lot of work and quite nerve-wracking. Touchdown a little rough and had to correct a bit further through that, but got her plenty safe. My buddy says, "Man, that was a smooth landing." Meanwhile, I'm trying to keep my hand from shaking as I bring the throttle down. Story 3. My friend is a commercial pilot. He said, for the most part, it's a pretty easy job since a lot is automated. You just got to make sure your wings don't freeze or else you're pretty screwed up. I think the worst oh crap moment my friend had was when he had an engine problem and he had to emergency land at a nearby airport. He made it safely and is still flying around. Story 4. I built an Alpi Pioneer with my father. On our second flight, I was flying and the regulator rectifier caught fire and filled the cockpit with smoke and left us running on battery power only. Me, you have the stick. Dad, no, you broke it. Anyway, we made a pan call, shut everything down except the engine, wound down the gear and managed to get back to EGSL. We spoke to Alpi about it and all they said was it's a common fault. We will send you a different regulator and rectifier. Story 5. My father was a pilot and he tells a story saying, I only earned my paycheck once in the last 10 years of flying. You see, normally the computers do most of the work of flying a plane. The pilots, largely and increasingly, are just along for the ride. The pilots are there for when things go wrong. They're paid and trained to be on-hand emergency operator technicians. They were flying a 767 from Atlanta to Amsterdam when someone smelled electrical smoke. The autopilot computer actually caught fire. A co-pilot went into the belly of the plane with a fire extinguisher, and Dad took manual control over either Halifax or Iceland, he can't remember which, and flew the plane to an emergency landing in LaGuardia. The best part is that my aunt lived on Long Island and was hosting a fancy cocktail party that night. Instead of going to a hotel, my dad decided to crash with his aunt and showed up in uniform with a hero story, proceeding to drink the bar dry. His itinerary was canceled and he was on his way home. My aunt's friends still talk about it. Dad flew A4s in Vietnam and was known for his appetite for stunts and taking the harder itineraries. He found commercial aviation incredibly boring compared to flying tail through a valley at 500 feet while taking fire from the hillsides. The tailplane is an easier target because the gunners have already aimed when firing at the lead plane. Story 6. I'm not a pilot, but I was flying with a friend in a small BT-12. During the flight, the engine sputtered and gave out. I didn't think anything of it because I figured he was just testing something. Later, he told me that he genuinely could not figure out what happened and was freaking out for about 20 seconds until the engine fired right back up. Story 7. Glider pilot here. This one time I was on tow and we flew straight into a surprise cold front. My hometown is prone to freak storms that aren't very predictable. Anyway, as soon as a tow plane flies into the storm, it goes into a nosedive with me right behind him. At this point, we are at around 1.5 thousand feet AGL. I figured I could cut rope and pull out if needed at the last second, so I stayed on. Down we went like eagles diving on a fish. There was a sudden thud as a large sheet of rain slammed against the frame of my plane. My grip on the stick was like a vice, yet my movements were controlled and subconsciously meticulous. Time slowed as the thought of passing away suddenly entered my mind. I felt as though I wouldn't ever see the tow plane pull up as our descent took us straight over for the rocky forest ahead. Then, like a gift sent from the good Lord himself, an updraft slammed into the tow plane, and he was able to pull out of the perilous dive. In the end, the flight turned out to be one of the most adventurous flights I have had yet. Story 8. Airline pilot here. I have oh crap moments, like all the time. You have no idea how often we get coffee on our only clean uniform shirt for the 4-day trip. I also drop my pen occasionally and have to spend a few minutes pretending I'm a contortionist to get it back from the abyss that is the underside of a pilot seat. Seriously though, I have been in the airline industry for like 8 years and I can't really recall a true oh crap moment at all. There have been moments of elevated attention for sure, but nothing that even really approached the oh crap moment where you realize afterwards how close you came to making the news. They're not just making this stuff up when they say that air travel is the safest form of travel. The truth is that there is a lot of sky out there and not a lot of stuff in it to run into. There is the Earth, but we've gotten pretty good at hitting it in a controlled manner, usually on a runway. Space is a threat, but luckily the airplanes I fly aren't capable of climbing that high anyway, so I couldn't catapult out of the atmosphere if I wanted to. There are other planes, but we have impressively robust systems designed to do nothing other than keep us from swapping paint with each other. They work quite well. I feel sorry for the poor schlubs stuck staring at a radar screen all day, telling us not to hit one another, but I'm very thankful that they are there. There are occasions where pilots forget how to pilot, and this is currently the biggest threat to a very impressive safety record otherwise. The airlines, the FAA, and other governmental aviation agencies from countries that are not the USA, the pilot unions, and the pilots themselves all work very hard to improve on this. It's a constantly moving target to some degree and encompasses a very complex mix of human factors, training, education, and technology. Story 9. My biggest oh crap moment was when my windshield shattered at 26,000 feet. The passengers did know about this one because you could see right into the cockpit from the cabin. It's very rare to have actual oh crap moments for pilots. Usually it's because of a mechanical malfunction with something that catches you by surprise. If you say oh crap to anything else other than that, you are just an idiot that should not be flying at the professional level. I'd say saying oh crap is strongly correlated to the amount of flight time you have. The more experience you have, the less you say oh crap. There is a saying in aviation about learning to fly. You start out with a full bag of luck and an empty bag of experience. The trick is to fill up the bag of experience before you run out of luck. Story 10. Student pilot here. A few weeks ago during a flight with my instructor, the engine turned off short final. Basically, I had the runway made and pulled the throttle back to idle. I felt the vibration from the engine stop and had enough time to say, I think the engine turned off before we were on the ground. My oh crap moment was the next time I went flying. My instructor told me it was a problem with the throttle linkage and pulling power all the way out starved the engine. Before the engine turned off, we were practicing power off stalls, which are done at idle. Also, for all the other pilots reading this, yes, I did check the idle during run-up with no issue. Story 11. Shortly after getting my PPL, I took 3 workmates for a local pleasure flight one Friday afternoon from an uncontrolled airfield, EGBN. Within 3 minutes, I'd made my first ever real mistake by taxiing halfway to the wrong holding point. I had every intention of entering and pootling along a live runway without a care in the world before the AG radio operator called to give me a stern telling off, and I realized what I was doing. Within 5 minutes, I made my second ever mistake. I entered the right runway at the right place, but with a clearly less than stellar look up to final, turned to backtrack and found myself face to face with another aircraft on short final. Utterly soiled myself, streamed straight across the runway onto a taxiway opposite and parked for a few minutes just to calm down. Passengers all utterly aware of how close we came to watching someone execute a go-around and being hit by an airplane. Flight successfully executed, everyone had a really great time, and I learned to plan my taxi route and triple-check the runway and approach before steaming past a hold. I learned at a major controlled airfield where my taxi route was always exactly the same, and I never bothered to get into the habit of looking up and down the runway and onto final because, well, ATC cleared me off for takeoff. Mentioned the story to my instructor whose sole comment was, well, that's what you get when you fly from an uncontrolled airfield. Story 12. Helicopter pilot. In my Army days, we would do a rapid descent through what is known as the Small Arms Threat Band. Basically, it's a maneuver where you go from an altitude where most small arms can't hit you to a low level, i.e. 10 to 30 feet off the ground at high speed. Point nose at ground, make sure you do not overspeed the rotor head, pull nose up at last moment. Simples. Now, the rate of descent, torque are all well-known numbers for this type of maneuver. You basically fly the aircraft to the numbers with co-pilot monitoring gauges. On one occasion, co-pilot says our rate of descent was way more than it should be, but all power, rotor speed, and torque were bang on the numbers pretty much. After doing this type of thing, who knows how many times, I got a feeling something was not from visual cues. Normally, you start to pull out of the dive between 500 and 1,000 feet depending on terrain. I start pulling up somewhere around 1,500 to 2,000 feet, and that is when I heard the pucker moment. That is where your bum clenches up. Nose is level, and I am pulling live 80% power, and we are still rapidly descending 90%, 100%, co-pilot on the controls. We pass through 500 feet and ground coming up super fast. I can actually see where we are going to hit. Screw it. I pull the collective to its upper stop, which basically means we are putting so much torque into the aircraft that it can literally twist apart. We level off at 30 to 50 feet. Alarms are going off everywhere. That's co-pilot's job to deal with. My job is to get us on the ground. I pick a field to my right and do a run on landing and emergency shutdown. Aircraft is winding down and the co-pilot goes, "Did you call a pan or a mayday?" Nope. Neither did I. We call home over the radio and the QRF is there in less than 10 minutes. Afterwards, the aircraft is toast pretty much. There is a slider on the torque meter that shows max torque on a particular flight. It was off scale. I'm not sure if the AC ever went back into service. When trying to figure out what the heck went wrong, we could only come up with we must have been in a column of rapidly descending air called a microburst. Can't see them, can't predict them, just wrong place, wrong time. Story 13. My grandfather flies small airplanes as a hobby. I fly with him quite a lot and I had 2 oh crap moments so far. It was winter, about minus 10 degrees Celsius, but the weather was great, so we decided to go out for a spin. So we always fly about 200-300 meters high so we can look into people's backyards. Suddenly, the engine cut out and would not start again, so we landed in a field only to find out the fuel pump had frozen. Another time we were flying and suddenly it got really foggy. Problem is, in the Czech Republic, which is where he lives, there is a regulation that states that planes up to a certain weight do not have to have GPS and so on. And this one time we had no GPS with us and we didn't see a thing. It was only white. We also didn't really know at which altitude we were flying since we couldn't see any mountains and so on. That was really scary. Story 14. Private pilot here. A story that kind of fits the question follows. Was a student at the time, tried to call for flight following on the flight service station frequency. They get back to me and ask, "What are you calling for, N5499Q?" I repeat my call to ask for flight following. They repeat the same quote as before. In an aha moment, you could probably see a light bulb turn on over my head. I stare at the radio, look at my CFI, stare back at the radio and look at my CFI again and mouth, "Oh crap," to him. He laughs and lets me continue to open my flight plan on the FSS frequency. He wasn't oblivious, but he did laugh a bit afterwards. Nonetheless, I always check my frequencies before talking on the radio. I bet other people flying that day were like, this guy is an idiot. Story 15. While practicing for my private license, I was doing repeated power on stall recoveries. Decided to do one with a crosswind, slowed down to takeoff speed around 60 knots and brought the power in. Brought the nose up as per normal, speed tapered off, stall horn started honking as expected, prepared to lower the nose. Instead, the left wing stalled entirely and the plane pretty much rolled over onto its back while the tail swung to the right, which is the initial part of a flat spin. I pushed the yoke entirely forward and held it there with the full opposite rudder, and the plane, a 172, plummeted. The plane gained a little airspeed and pulled itself together, and I pulled out of a 100% nose-down dive. Flew back to the airport, shaking like a leaf, at full throttle. I just wanted to get the heck out of the air. Story 16. Malcolm Gladwell has a very interesting chapter in his book, Outliers, about plane crashes. Most of them have to do with pilot errors piling up into some sort of perfect storm. The number one cause is a high power distance relationship between the pilot and co-pilot. If co-pilots do not feel confident enough about effectively communicating with their higher status captains, it can be very dangerous. Likewise, if captains believe themselves to be infallibly competent and do not think they need help from co-pilots, this too can be dangerous. This is why pilots from countries with high power distance indexes tend to have more plane crashes on average. Countries like Korea, Brazil, and Malaysia, whereas pilots from countries like the US, UK, and Norway, where everyone is seen as more or less equal despite social status, tend to have less crashes on average. Story 17. This will be buried, but as one of the Marines passengers who survived a C-130 having its probs absolutely Swiss cheese by ground fire during ascent, I'm sure that pilot was saying, "Oh crap," as we were pulling corkscrews and popping chaff and barely making airspeed. Because one round hit right by my head, and I know I said, "That's it then," myself. And it turned out I knew one of our fighter escorts who told me afterward that we weren't expected to make it out of Anbar, let alone to the Apod. So if you were piloting the last bird of 4 from AA on 040717, then you are my freaking hero, Semper Fi. I hope they gave you a DFC because they wouldn't tell us your name when the old man asked, but you earned it. Story 18. On a United 727 over North Platte, Nebraska, I was listening to Channel 9 on the in-flight entertainment. That channel is our cockpit's radio traffic with ground controllers. Pretty geeky, yes. At the same time, I was looking out the window and a Gulfstream private jet passed under us about 100 feet away. It was so close that I was able to see what the pilots were wearing. I looked at the guy next to me and said, "We almost got hit just now." Our pilot calmly called into Denver Center and asked them to start the paperwork for the near hit. Start the paperwork, the pilot's equivalent of, fine mom, after almost causing like a multi-million-dollar mid-air collision. Story 19. A bit late, but here goes. I'm a pilot with 5,000 hours on the A330 and A320, and this just happened to a colleague of ours last week. They descended below the MSA, minimum safe altitude, and didn't notice they were flying over a mountainous area. The radio altimeter informed them they were 2,500 feet above ground, but due to the heavy thunderstorms and clouds, they did not pay much attention to the call and kept descending. You have to understand that when all hell breaks loose inside the cockpit, the passengers are only aware of the turbulence they are experiencing and nothing else. Long story short, they had the GPWS called terrain pull-up and were 350 feet away from a disaster. Story 20. Hot air balloon pilot here. Hard to have an oh crap moment without everyone realizing, but here's the story anyway. We used to live near Lake Michigan, and flying around there, you have to be aware of lake effect winds. This night was calm and beautiful. The flight was going great. As we approached for landing in a small field behind a tree line, the lake effect kicked in and sent us 180 degrees straight into the trees. Trees and balloons don't mix, but that wasn't the worst of it. Power lines we couldn't see behind the trees was the real oh crap moment. Hit them square in the basket, sparks everywhere. Luckily, we hit the basket and not the cables, and we were able to get above and beyond them. Landed a short while later and then only noticed some of the holes in our clothes from the sparks. Had those sparks gone through a fuel line, we would have been toast, like literally. And if you're learning a thing or two from this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. My dad is an airline pilot, and usually the first question people ask him once they find out is, "So, how many times have you crashed?" He's been flying for over 35 years, and no, he's never crashed. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have had this conversation with you. He does have a good couple of stories, though, like the time an engine failed right over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Passengers didn't have a clue. It's okay though, you don't need all the engines. Well, the time there was too much ice on the runway in Helsinki and he realized the plane wouldn't stop. Also, nothing passengers would know of, the plane did eventually stop. My favorite is the one where the plane got hit by lightning, right into the cockpit window. That's something where the passengers would definitely know something's up. He said there was this incredibly loud bang and then something like yellow and red skin slithered along the windows. Must have been an awkward announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we just got hit by lightning. It's all cool though. We only get in trouble if it's hail. So I suppose there aren't nearly as much emergency situations for a pilot as people might think. And most of the time, it will be something most people wouldn't expect. It's not hull breaches, fires, snakes, or revels. Heavy winds while landing, hail, or medical emergencies are the much bigger problems. Flying is incredibly safe. Driving a car is much, much more likely to end you. Story 22. Just a private pilot here. I have oh crap moments all the time, none of them all that serious. The most scared I've ever been was during my training. Me and my instructor landed at a small airstrip that had cheap gas to fill up. This was a Cessna 152, which is a very small, underperforming plane. If you Google it, you'll see what I mean. So we top off the gas tanks and try to take off. Thankfully, my instructor was a light young woman, but I am 250 pounds. At full fuel with our weight, this plane is struggling to get up in the air. At the end of the runway is a tree line that might be 50 to 75 feet up, and it's not clear if we're going to make it or not. There was not enough runway to stop, so we were committed to hitting this tree line. Not one of our tires grazes some leaves, but we make it out fine. Never did fly the 152 again, though. That Cessna 152's takeoff roll probably felt like trying to outrun a sloth on a treadmill. Story 23. Commercial pilot here. Small things seem to happen on every flight. A call out might be missed, mess up a radio call, brakes are too hot, pilot flying might be ref plus 20 on final instead of plus 10, etc. This is why we have 2 people on the flight deck and plenty of checklists and callouts. It takes a lot of neglect and breakdown of CRM for pilots to cause an accident. Occasionally, there are mechanical issues beyond our control. I've had a couple of gear and flap issues myself. This is why we go through recurring training every 6 months. It's 5 days of nothing but emergency/abnormal simulator procedures and system reviews to make sure we are safe. American pilots are held to an extremely high standard. The flight crew works as a team, not the case in a lot of countries, and it takes a perfect sequence of things going wrong to actually bring an aircraft down. I can promise you that if you're on my airplane, I am going to do everything possible to be safe. My life is invested in it too. Story 24. I'm really new to flying. I have just over 12 hours of flight time and just soloed the other day. A few weeks back, I was flying with my instructor in a Diamond DA-20 about 2,000 feet above the ground. At one point in the flight, the plane started to shake and the engine made a funny noise. The whole situation only took a few seconds. I had no idea what happened or even what to do in an emergency given that I only had 4 to 5 hours of flight time at the time. What made it worse is that after it happened, my flight instructor looks at me and says, "What the heck was that?" in a totally non-joking way, scaring the crap out of me. Luckily, nothing was wrong and we got back safely. Story 25. As a former Army Black Hawk pilot, I feel like I've had my share of uh-oh moments, especially while deployed. My most vivid oh crap memory was during one of my first flights in Iraq. I wasn't fresh out of flight school, but I had only been flying for a few years, maybe 400 hours, and certainly didn't know what to expect in the desert. This also meant I didn't really know I should be afraid when trouble loomed. I was on a battlefield circulation mission at night flying with NVGs. While there are some decent-sized hills in northern Iraq and mountains in the far north, for the most part the terrain is pretty bland. Although sparse, ground lights are a must for helping to identify the horizon on low illumination nights. On this mission, there wasn't much in the way of terrestrial illumination. As the mission went on, it became apparent that something was happening. The ground lights were starting to fade. All of a sudden, we couldn't see the silhouette of the aircraft in front of us. We could barely make out their infrared strobe flashing. We had hit a wall of dust and we were getting into trouble. There weren't enough calibrated nav aids, navigational aids, in Iraq to fly in MIC, instrumental meteorological conditions, and our aircraft were not equipped with IFR-certified GPSs. We were also 30 miles away from the closest airfield. We had to maintain sight of the aircraft in front of us and identify the ground. Practice and instinct dictated that our flight slow down and descend a bit to get better visual cues. We maintained good internal communications and radio contact with the other aircraft, but it felt like hours of silence between each transmission. At some point, I thought to myself, well, this is it, probably not going to make it back. Our crew chiefs could hear everything that was going on and were a bit antsy, but the passengers didn't have a clue. When we slowed back to about 20 knots and descended to about 50 feet AGL above ground level, we started making our way in the direction of FOB, Forward Operating Base Warrior. We could once again distinguish our sister aircraft on the ground, but obstacles were still elusive. Eventually, we started seeing the oil fires that burned around Kirkuk. Fortunately, the other pilot in my aircraft had been deployed to the same area of Iraq a few years earlier and was able to navigate the flight using the oil fires as a guide. Obviously, we made it, but within a few days, I was on another night mission escorting a medevac aircraft transporting an injured military working dog to a vet facility near Baghdad when we hit another dust storm and I experienced extreme spatial disorientation while on the controls. Think of trying to find your way around while swimming 10 feet deep in murky water, no visual cues. We were in a full power climb with the nose slightly pitched up. If I hadn't realized what was happening and transferred the controls, we would have eventually lost all airspeed. After a while, I got burnt out with anxiety about unseen dust storms and had to take a break from night missions. Story 26. I've had 2 close calls I can think of that my passengers were unaware of. The first was a touch and go at a short runway that had water at both ends. I came in a little too fast, so I touched down at almost the halfway point on the runway, barely got off the ground before running off the runway. My one passenger commented, "Wow, I didn't know we would get this close to the pier." My thoughts? Me neither. The other time I was arriving at an unfamiliar airport. Their Unicom frequency was 122.72, but I set my radio to 122.75. I was told it was a busy airport, but I heard nothing on the radio coming in. On final approach, I realized my mistake, changed frequencies to find out there was another plane on final approach trying to get my attention. I'd say he was less than a mile from me. Passengers never knew a thing. I think these examples can make pilots seem unsafe, but everyone makes little mistakes. You never stop learning. The key to being a good pilot is to learn from them the first time they happen. Story 27. Corporate pilot here. I have maybe 1 or 2 oh crap moments a year. And it's not, oh crap, are we going to make it out of this alive? It's more like, this is going to require more focus than a routine flight. There have only been 2 flights in my career where our actual safety was a concern. What most people don't understand is that our jets are rated to fly long distances with an engine shutdown. An en route engine failure really wouldn't even stress me out. I've been struck by lightning twice, had 2 engine failures, and the plane caught on fire once, one of my 2 real scares. Ask me anything. It's proven that flying is the safest method of transportation. A few days ago, I had 2 aborted landings in the same flight due to poor weather. It was a routine flight for us, but it makes the passengers very nervous when this happens. Story 28. Flew through a low-level wind shear in a 172 on final approach into MBT once. Scared the crap out of me. All I could do was firewall the throttle, dump my flaps, and hope for the best. I watched my airspeed jump from 65 knots to 120 plus and then drop to 0. I thought about all those stories about aircraft that didn't survive the exact same situation I found myself in. Honestly, my training kicked in and I don't really remember what happened. I was able to fly through it and make a successful go-around and land on the second try. It's noted in my logbook and I know I'll never forget it. Story 29. I was letting my low-time pilot friend fly a J3 Cub, the little yellow high-wing tandem 2-seater, and he was doing the landing from the rear seat. Suddenly, I was getting nervous due to our sudden pitch-up altitude. I told him that I will fix it because things weren't looking great. His immediate response was, "Holy crap, you better take it." He then proceeded to hand me his joystick. After landing, we stopped and saw that the stick had not had its bolt put through its hole. The stick had been held in by paint alone for several hours as it is a newly restored plane. It all ended in some laughter and promptly crap bricks. Story 30. Was doing touch and goes at an uncontrolled airport on a perfect spring day in the Midwest. I'm following procedure, making all of my calls on the radio, and I'm on my final approach, less than 250 feet of altitude with full flaps, when a twin beach pulls into the runway and just stops. I'm less than 5 seconds before landing and there is now a plane on my runway, commenced schmuck at full pucker. Threw everything into the throttle, moved the flaps up and edged over so the schmuck didn't lift off into me, all while yelling into the radio for this guy to get off the damn runway. He's now started his takeoff and is in the air without a peep on the radio or any idea how close he was to me landing on his roof and ending us all. There were 3 or 4 other planes in the area who saw this and I got quite a few compliments about how well I handled it. And it only got better when they found out that I was still just a student pilot. Some days I regret not finishing my license, but then I think about the close calls that I had as a student, and I don't know if I want to put myself or my family in that kind of jeopardy. Some examples: a private jet leaving this same airport while I'm practicing declares an emergency, and I almost got into an accident in midair while the traffic clears out. My instructor has me take off and go into the ground effect and then takes the controls and does a 270 turn less than 25 feet above a field of corn. Same instructor does a barrel roll in a 1A2. Story 32 1. Story 31. Private pilot here, was flying with my wife in a small 4-seater propeller-driven airplane down to Montgomery Airport in San Diego, and I wasn't instrument rated at the time, meaning I had to stay clear of clouds. Well, there were clouds right at the altitude I needed to be flying, so I requested to fly lower to keep under the clouds. The clouds kept getting lower and lower until I found myself flying about 500 feet above the ocean, just off the shore, at the same level as the banner towers, the airplanes flying with banners. Told my wife, "Hey, look at the homes along the coast above us. Isn't that neat?" While privately thinking, "Oh, crap." I was on flight following and talking to a controller the whole time, and I had an instructor who insisted we practice scud running, but still, it wasn't a comfortable moment. We found a break in the clouds just north of La Jolla Natural Park, turned inland, and landed at Montgomery. Needless to say, the next week I signed up for IFR training. Story 32. I'm not an airline pilot, but a helicopter pilot in New York. I do tours and small charter flights, typically with no more than 3 to 4 people on board. Before that, I was a flight instructor for 2 years, so I can speak from 2 different fields. While doing charters and tours, I haven't had any oh crap moments. There are many things in place to try and limit that beginning before the aircraft even leaves the hangar for the day. The biggest things I've seen have been external, from local traffic in the area and birds. In my experience, passengers are pretty oblivious to anything, though. Now, as a flight instructor, it was almost every week I had an oh crap moment. 90% of the time, it's from the students doing the wrong thing, forcing me to fix the situation before we drop out of the sky. The helicopters used in flight instructing are very unforgiving, and things can go wrong very fast. Since the students are students, they don't necessarily know or understand why they did what they did was wrong. That's when we, as instructors, step in and have to teach while stressed out. Also, the combination of having students with very little English doesn't help the situation. Story 33. The only oh crap moment I've ever had was during my PPL instruction. We were practicing recovery from unusual altitudes. You close your eyes, your instructor shakes the plane around and points it in a super weird direction, and you have to recover using only instruments. So I close my eyes and I'm immediately weightless. This guy, who was in his 70s, pitched the aircraft down so hard and so fast that the checklist came out of the seat and made me almost crap myself. Scariest and most exhilarating moment I've ever had flying. Story 34. Private pilot here. I was taking my future wife for a plane ride when we were first dating. It was an older model Cessna 172 that I hadn't flown in a while, and there are 3 knobs next to each other on the panel: throttle, carburetor heat, and fuel mixture. At low engine RPMs, you're supposed to pull the carb heat knob to prevent ice forming inside the engine. The newer planes I fly only often have 2 knobs, throttle and fuel mixture. On final approach, I reached down to pull the carb heat knob, but ended up pulling the fuel mixture knob instead, cutting the fuel low and momentarily stopping my engine. The silence felt like an eternity, but I bet it was only a few seconds, if that. I jammed the fuel mixture knob back in place, and fortunately the engine came back alive and I landed without incident. I don't think my wife ever realized there was a problem. She never said, and I never told. My bum sure did stay clenched up for a while, though. Story 35. Flight instructor here. I have about 600 hours in light aircraft ranging from Tomahawks to Senecas. Well, one time I was flying from A to B while training and took a passenger up. I did some cool crap where I would fly in a parabola and have some zero-G fun. The axe in the back came up and landed between my legs. I was lucky. Another time I was teaching a student about wing drop stalls when the plane went into a spin. That was kind of fun and scary too. I was landing in a 35-knot crosswind in a 172 once when a gust blew my tail out and I barely made the go-around. I landed so far down the runway in a twin engine that I had to turn to avoid the fence at the end. I nearly hit a plane 2 times. Once I flew through the other aircraft's exhaust smoke. It was so close. The other time wasn't so close. I have landed with popped tires, landed in the dark with no lights, gotten into hairy spins, starved my carburetor of fuel, landed in crazy winds, known many people and friends who have passed away and even more who have crashed, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Story 36. Early on in my career, I had lots more than just before I retired as a helicopter pilot. Inside my brain, I would be saying, should I be doing this? Or where the heck am I? Or is this weather any good to be flying in? Outside in the client world, I would be Mr. I'm in control. You're always just going outside your comfort zone when you are accumulating hours and experience, so the oh crap moments are quite frequent. After 18 years of flying, it would happen about twice a season. The trouble was, it started to not affect me very much at the end, which is one of the reasons I retired. Once the natural fear reflex is no longer there, it's time to fold them. A pilot should always question every action and decision. The more you question, the more you eliminate the oh crap times. But you always get the times when you find out that it is what you don't know that bites you. Story 37. I heard my pilot say oh crap a few years ago. In 2011, I was working for the fire program, setting up satellite systems and VoIP for remote attack bases. I was the only passenger in a turbo beaver, and we were flying around one of the largest fires of that season. For the last 2 days, we had been unable to fly out of Red Lake due to the humidity and wind conditions making it way too smoky to fly. I've been taking pictures of the fire out the window when I hear the pilot on the headset say, "Oh crap." And I guess the wind had changed directions ahead of a huge storm front coming in from Manitoba. The cooler air and the change of direction pretty much caused the smoke from the fire to stop blowing away from us and shoot straight up in the air like a huge, thick black column. The pilot had to climb way higher than he should have been flying to get clear of the smoke. We were both hacking and coughing like crazy. We turned around and made it back to Red Lake intact, but you could tell he was pretty shaken when we landed back on the ground. Story 38. I once requested to receive flight following from approach control while flying VFR with a friend. This essentially means that they provide me with any information on nearby traffic so that I can point them out and avoid any mid-air collisions. Traffic is usually called out when it is 2 to 3 miles from you, depending on what you are doing. Well, here we are, flying comfortably at 2,500 feet, and the controller calls to say 88 Charlie Papa, traffic half mile, 10 o'clock. That's way too close for comfort. I immediately snap my head to the left to see an airplane about 250 feet below me, banking right and diving to avoid a collision between the both of us. Knowing my friend wasn't all that familiar with aviation, I remained calm and called back to the controller to tell him I had a visual on the traffic. Easily the scariest moment in my young flying experience, but my friend still has no clue how close we were to passing away that day. Story 39. Another pilot friend and I were both flying in a 172 to Melbourne, Florida from Daytona Beach. She was flying since she paid for the rental, but I was still listening to the radio so I can confirm that we were where we were supposed to be when this occurred. Anyways, we were being vectored into Melbourne and it was dark, and all of a sudden, a twin-engine Diamond, likely from Embry-Riddle, flew right above us from behind. I kid you not, I had to look out my right window to see the right wingtip and out the left corner of the windscreen to see the left wingtip of the Diamond. Me and my friend both yelled, "Crap!" And then I asked my friend's sister in the back if she saw that. It turned out she had turned down the volume on her headset so she didn't have to listen to the ATC and could read something on her phone, and she was oblivious to the whole event. ATC was not in contact with that plane, and since I went to Embry-Riddle, not a pilot there, it's way too expensive, I told a friend to repeat the story to his flight instructor. The instructor supposedly ordered a check of all the Diamond G1000 data cards to look over the transponder data for that night, but it didn't turn up anything. We never found out who was flying the other plane, but I'm not going to forget that flight. It just goes to show that even when you are doing everything right, no matter how safe you are, you can still be ended by the stupidity of others. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.